Charlie and Hadley. This is Chapter 2 of the wonderful flight to the mushroom planet called At 5 Thallo Street. Through the trees shone a soft, spreading light. It came from the window of Mr. Bass's cellar, and if you had peeked in, you would have seen a little old man bending over an enormous ledger. The light shining down on him was curious. It was bright and yet cool. It was gentle and yet penetrating. It had the silvery restfulness of moonlight combined with the clarity of sunlight. Mr. Bass had invented it and had all done the wiring and the stringing up of those glowing bubbles of glass himself. But he couldn't, for the life of him, have told you how he invented it. 15 and 10 or 25, he muttered to himself. He was seated on a very high stool at his workbench, and he was surrounded by such a clutter of screws and nails and wires and batteries and bits of twine and bottles of green and yellow and raspberry-colored fluids as you ever saw. Behind him, piled up on the floor, were his empty mushroom boxes. And 6 or 32, no, 31, said Mr. Bass, licking the end of his pencil and writing down 31. Then he did some more adding and subtracting. $5.92, he announced finally. But really, I don't know why I bothered, for I have a suspicion I shall have no time to spend it. However, and he sighed, it would have been a pity to waste all those nice mushrooms. Then he turned and surveyed the rest of his cellar. More pushing up, too. Dear me, what's to become of them? Ah, well, there's no use worrying about that now. He put the ledger away in a drawer, stuck the pencil behind his ear, and hopped down off the stool. Rocket motor, he said to himself, as if he were beginning to check items off of a list in his mind. And he looked over to where a large, shining, complicated contraption rested on a broad shelf. Fuel, he muttered, frowning and pursing his lips. Then he tapped the side of his nose and went over to a large, battered metal container which looked like an old milk can. He lifted the lid and sniffed. Hee, he chuckled. And now for the final touch. Just those 4 drops of atomic trithylacid carbonate. He skipped over to his bench and quickly chose a bottle. Then plop, 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 plop. Whee! Cried the little Mr. Bass, rubbing his hands together with delight. That'll fix it. Blow a mountain to smithereens, that would. 10 mountains. Then he printed a label which said, Fuel for Spaceship, and stuck it on the side of the can and put the lid back on again. Next he went over to a big wooden vat, lifted the lid, and peered in. Then he got a huge wooden spoon and began stirring and stirring, occasionally lifting the spoon so that he could examine the smooth, clear, gluey substance that dripped from it. He seemed tremendously pleased. Beautiful consistency, he murmured. Simply beautiful. Couldn't be better. Now, if only the boy doesn't take too long with his spaceship. A week would see this stuff ruined. Of course, I could add a little... tarnation. What was it now? Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Now he popped the lid on again, leaned the spoon on a clean piece of paper against the wall, and printed another label. This time it said, Fluid Resinoid Silicon, with other ingredients, for treatment of exterior of spaceship. And when it was finished, he pasted it onto the vat. Never can tell, he murmured. I just might have to leave before I can complete my mission. However, I simply must trust. Then he gave a last look around, turned out the light, went outside and closed the door and scurried round to the front of the house. A minute or so later, he was up on the second story, seated on another high stool. But this time, instead of making labels or adding and subtracting into a ledger, he was squinting through a large telescope. Yes, he murmured to himself, I must have been right. Then he opened a notebook which he had by him, which was titled, in his very peculiar handwriting, A Few Facts Concerning the Hitherto Undiscovered Satellite Basidium X. He opened the notebook to a page covered with figures, and his finger went down the columns. Diameter 35 miles. Yes, there's no way out of it. And yet, if the diameter is so small, then how in thunderation has it managed to hang on to its atmosphere? The smaller the planet, the less gravity it has, and therefore the less atmosphere. A puzzle, a most extraordinary puzzle. Now again he peered into the eyepiece of his telescope, squinting and screwing up his face in his intense interest. Oh, lovely, he whispered, a lovely color. Bluish-green, yet not always, now pale, now a bit deeper. Variations could be the effect of our atmosphere, however. But what could the green be? Not chlorine, thank goodness, because then my boy, whoever he is, would be unable to breathe. No, some infinitesimal plant matter, perhaps, another mystery, but it's beautiful, and those living on Basidium a blessing. For that green mist must contain the eyes of Basidium against the too brilliant nearness of the earth. Marvelous indeed are the arrangements of nature. Mr. Bass smiled to himself, plucked his pencil from behind his ear, and made the following notation in his Basidium notebook. "The deliverance of my people on Basidium is near," he wrote, "because today there appeared in the newspaper my want ad for a small spaceship. Who has seen it? What boy? Only one boy, of course. The right boy will have seen or been shown that notice. He will be lying in his bed at this moment, wondering what it could possibly mean. But by being the right boy, he will have his plans all drawn, and they will be ready, even now, on some shelf or table in his darkened room. Soon I shall meet him. Who is he, I wonder? What is his name? Oh, I am like a child myself, for I can hardly wait to find out." Then little Mr. Bass, still smiling, closed the notebook, laid down his pencil, turned out the light, and went off to bed. And that's chapter 2.